Welcome to Executive Insights for Life Sciences Innovators, and thanks for joining us. On this podcast, we'll explore leadership, innovation, and growth in the life sciences sector. I'm Don Alexander, founder of GeneCoda, a boutique executive search firm dedicated to helping visionary leaders with the life sciences companies shaping the future of therapeutics and scientific tools. On each episode, we'll dive into candid conversations with industry pioneers, uncovering strategies, insights, and real-world experiences that drive success in our industry. If you're interested in presenting as a guest of a future episode, please scan the barcode image at the top of my video frame and follow the instructions. Now I'm pleased to be joined by Karthik Sriram, the head of FP&A at Parabilis Medicines. Welcome, Karthik.
Hi, Don. Happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Karthik is a seasoned professional with over 16 years of experience in pharma and biotech. His expertise spans financial management, leading and developing finance teams, strategic planning, business development and licensing, capital raising, and operational analysis. Most recently, Karthik served as the Executive Director of Corporate Strategy, Deal Finance, and FP&A at Century Therapeutics. Previously, Karthik held the position of Strategic Planning and Analysis Lead at Amicus Therapeutics. Throughout his tenure at both Amicus and Century, he played a pivotal role in capital raising efforts, successfully securing over $800 million through various financial instruments. Karthik holds a master's degree in biomedical engineering from the University of South Florida and an MBA in finance and strategy from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. So, Karthik, again, welcome. We'll jump right into, if good by you, your career journey and leadership philosophy. And so maybe you could give us a little bit of background on what initially drew you towards the life sciences industry.
Sure. So when I started out, a lot of kids in my age, we were very focused on, engineering. I grew up during the times when there was a technology boom, the .NET era. So there was a lot of focus on engineering. But, a couple of life events definitely kind of made me pivot towards life sciences. The first one was my grandfather, who lived with us through my schooling years. He ended up getting diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and to me, it was just devastating to see someone, who was at the peak of his health, someone who lived a very healthy lifestyle, kind of from diagnosis to passing away was just 6 months. That was definitely something that kind of made me feel like, hey, it would be cool to kind of work at the intersection of, what I would call applied sciences like engineering and biology, and that was the first inflection point. And then after that, through the last 20, 25 years, there have been like other events. And then most recently, I had a validation of why I'm working in this industry. My mother was, diagnosed with cancer a year ago. And as you can imagine, for any son, that's one of the most devastating kind of pieces of information you can get. Thankfully, God willing, she's on the mend and things are working. But it's primarily my family and what I've seen around me that kind of made me focus on life sciences.
Yeah, absolutely. As with many we speak with, personal experiences help draw you really into the industry. Now, your background in biomedical engineering, tell us a little bit about the transition, if you would, to strategy and finance related roles.
Sure. I would say that my life is a sequence of, unintended, unplanned events that happened. And I think it was partly how I was able to respond to it and kind of adapt. So I graduated, from my master's degree in biomedical engineering in the end of 2007, which is when the world was kind of imploding, the economy was imploding, and it was a challenging time. So I ended up finding a job with in the consulting space where I was working with medtech, pharma, and biotech companies, helping them with process improvements, getting them to kind of become operationally more efficient. And through that, I was exposed to more of the inner workings of pharma and biotech. And for me personally, biotech kind of had an allure to it, given the transformative cures that were coming up. Right, when I was in consulting, I had the amazing fortune to work with some industry leaders, right? Ariad Pharmaceuticals just since been acquired. Dendrion, I don't know if you remember that story of patients campaigning for the drug's approval. So biotech generally kind of attracted me for the kind of amazing cures that were coming up. And I did my MBA to kind of help me make that pivot into working in-house in a biotech company. And I was lucky enough to get into the MBA program at Wharton, which is a very finance-heavy MBA. And that helped me kind of understand, given my operational experience with biotech, added to the finance knowledge, I was able to make a pivot into biotech, primarily working in FP&A and strategic finance teams, helping biotech companies, raise capital or kind of define their financial strategy.
That's great. You've raised a lot of capital, obviously, in the past. How has your leadership philosophy evolved as you've taken on broader strategic responsibilities?
Great question, John. And I think I've lived now through two hype cycles of biotech. One in around circa 2015, and then during COVID when the market really exploded, and then the last 2 or 3 years that have been kind of not the best of years for biotech. And the one thing I felt has been consistent is being consistent to your values, right? Not trying to see, hey, what does the investor want to hear, or what does the markets want to hear, and kind of delivering that. Be true to your company's mission, right? If you're a rare disease company, lean in on that, understand like what the challenges are, stick true to your values, and also never shy away from bad news, right? I always talk to my wife and my kids about this song, the Lego movie, Everything is Awesome. And I think you can't be that way, right? When you talk to investors, they appreciate if you're honest and if you accept like, hey, these are challenges, but here are my plans to address these challenges, right? Everyone understands not every plan works, but as long as you are open about the challenges that you faced and what the impacts can be, I've seen that actually translates into good outcomes.
Gotcha. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you for that. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit, Karthik, about Parabilis and the innovations and trends that the company is developing. So Parabilis describes the Helicon platform as ultra tunable. And how does that design translate into potential therapeutic advantages?
That's a great question. So at Parabilis, we have these Helicon, which are basically alpha helices that are specific peptides that are able to breach the cell membrane. So you can actually target biological targets that are within the cell, right? That's what makes us special. And the reason why we call ourselves an ultra tunable platform is we have the proprietary knowledge to design these helices with the exact physical properties that we need, right? For you to be able to bind to these really tough targets, we call them as undruggable targets. And we say that there's this wall of shame of these targets that have never been able to be targeted by other therapies. So we can target based on, hey, we are looking at this protein. It's a really flat protein. So how do we bind to that? And which spot in that protein should we bind? We can design our helicons based on all these characteristics, right? Think of this almost as like you are building a peptide using like Lego pieces. So you can kind of mix and match. And we've also made some investments in our data sciences and engineering platform, which allows us to do this much more efficiently, right? There's an initial data pool that we have from our founders that is proprietary data that we have around 20 years worth of data. And then if you kind of take, and we are predicting only physical and chemical properties, which I believe is a much more, I should say it's much more predictable through machine learning models than biological targets or biological data. So given that combination of investments in data sciences and at the core, our technology is about kind of constructing these helicons for specific purposes, lends itself to being ultra tunable. And I hope I made sense there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great combination of the data that's involved and the peptide constructs, if you will. So that's wonderful. I guess from a financial strategy standpoint, how do you evaluate platform opportunities or therapeutic areas for investment?
So in the last few years, I think there's one word that's kind of it's become like the most polarizing word in biotech, which is platforms, right? During the COVID pandemic, the word platform was a hype word, right? The moment you said that you're a platform, investors were super happy to invest in you. But then what happened in that cycle, as with every hype cycle, is that people start using that word more loosely, right? In my mind, a platform basically means every subsequent program is going to be more efficient, both on the axis of capital, but also in the axis of complexity as well, right? It's got to be that self-sustaining. Every future project or program is going to be easier. And I think there are very few technologies that actually check the box for me, right? So that's the way I would describe a platform, and that's what I would really say a platform should be. And I believe that, so when I look at a company that says, hey, I have a platform, that's the first thing I ask them, right? Like, hey, what's your lead program? What was the time to clinic for your lead program? What about your follow-on program? How much did it cost to get to an IND? How much? And because that's the cost that the platform can really reduce, right? Because once you file an IND and you get into the clinic, most programs are the same cost, right? Because it depends on the therapeutic indication, how many patients are you dosing, what's your clinical strategy. Those are all independent of whether it's a platform or not. There are some advantages of being a platform because you can claim certain things. Your dose, your dose escalation can go faster. There are things, but I think the majority of efficiencies come in your lead optimization and getting to a drug candidate and filing an IND. So that's an area I would focus on. And I also believe in terms of therapeutic areas, I don't think there is a great therapeutic area or a weak therapeutic area. I think with the right management team, with the right capital strategy, you can make any therapeutic area, any product into a profitable product, right? Our industry is driven by this kind of blockbuster, like, hey, does it generate $1 billion of sales? If you generate $1 billion of sales, but your net margin in your company is much lower than the industry average, right? It doesn't matter. Versus, having a $500 million product, but running a really capital efficient enterprise is a much better value for investors. So I personally am not a believer that certain therapeutic areas are better than others. And also from a patient perspective, as I said, one of the reasons I work in biotech, or I choose to work in biotech, is that at the end of the day, you want to get these therapies to patients who are struggling, right? So we want to be as much of an equal opportunity. At least I want to be equal opportunity. Every patient suffering from every disease deserves a cure, right? So I don't want to differentiate between these therapeutic areas.
That's great. That's a really good overview. Thank you for that. As you think about industry trends or scientific shifts, Karthik, what do you believe will define the next era of biotech innovation?
There are two things, one geopolitical and one, I think, technological. I'll address the tougher one first, right? There's been a lot of focus on, hey, China is really catching up to the US, and China and US, people see that as a kind of a conflicting equation, right? Versus I think that over the next 5 years, things can actually get much more efficient. I believe that based on my experience talking to other leaders, especially in the CDMO space, there is an abundance of capacity in China, and I think in the US there's an abundance of ideas, right? So I think a marriage between these two is going to completely redefine what it takes to getting a therapy into the clinic. So I think that's going to be a major thing. How are companies going to adapt? How quickly do companies form partnerships or collaborations with entities in China? And for China, for Chinese CDMOs, this is a great opportunity as well, where they can kind of help these companies get to the clinic faster, and that's a great value that they can project to the US policymakers, that like, hey, we are not a threat, but we are kind of working with you, right? I think how the US and China kind of figure it out is going to be a major catalyst in how biotech shapes up. And the second thing is data sciences. As I mentioned previously, I'm a big believer in data sciences and machine learning, as they call it. I believe that there are targeted use cases for these technologies where we can make certain things more efficient, right? I don't think everything in the world is going to be amenable to being modeled and predicted. As a layperson, what I understand is like we have maybe understand 40 to 50% of how our human body works on a day-to-day basis. So there are some things that we will evolve, we will learn more, but some of the more tangible, definable things, I think data scientists is going to make things a lot more efficient, a lot more faster. And I think the FDA is also trending in the direction where, if you see recently, for some of the therapeutic methods of action, they are saying, hey, you don't have to do a non-human primate study. You can use some in silico models to kind of come up with some for skipping studies in NHPs. So I think that's where the world is going.
Absolutely, absolutely. Less reliance on those types of models. Good. Let's maybe expand a little bit further on the scaling, funding, and business strategy aspects. As a clinical stage company, I mean, but in a general sense, I guess, what challenges do clinical stage companies face, Karthik, when uniting financial planning, if you will, with scientific milestones?
So the biggest thing is the uncertainty and risk that's inherent in biotech, right? Most people who work in biotech companies, especially those who have an analytical background, it's not probabilistically the most attractive industry, right? The failure rates are high. A lot of companies go bust. It's not the most attractive of areas to work in. So I think there's a general skew. People who work in biotech, I think, generally are more optimistic than the average person in the US. So what that leads to is it's very tough for you to accept things can go wrong, right? Hey, what happens if, I want things to go really well. I want my product to, help patients and it's going to succeed in a clinical trial. But how do you handicap it, right? Like what's the downside? And that's usually where a lot of biotech companies struggle because you put 10 optimists in a room and tell them like, hey, how does the downside scenario look like? It's pathologically kind of difficult for them to think about it, right? So to me, that is the big thing I've been fortunate to learn, right? I've worked in very successful companies. I've worked in not so successful companies as well. But I think the one quote that one of my former bosses used to say is that biology doesn't care for your feelings, right? Which is at the start a really nice way of thinking about our industry. So you always want to keep that at the back of your mind. Hope for the best, be ready for when things really work out and everything is successful, but also be aware of like, hey, what happens if things don't go according to plan? And there are various versions of it, right? For example, you don't meet your primary endpoint, but your product still shows some clinical efficacy. And then the worst case is the product does not work. And if you see in the last 2 years, there are lots of companies that are kind of in between their best and worst case scenarios, right? And how do you plan for that? How do you think through that? I think that's the key part of financial planning, where you can think about all these different scenarios, handicap them with what you think is the most probabilistic, and plan for that.
That's great. I mean, along similar lines, I mean, how do you think about balancing ambitious science with disciplined resource allocation? There's only so many dollars, I suppose, to go around. So,
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? And again, very similar to what I said in the previous question, most people who work in biotech are super smart, and the scientists that I work with are world class, right? Especially being in a company that's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, every other person is from Harvard or Tufts or MIT. So when you put a bunch of smart people, the key thing you want to have is hey, there are going to be a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of things that we can do with our time, but here are the 4 or 5 things we need to focus on to kind of help the company get to the next phase, right? How do you build that discipline as a muscle in your company and have people focus on important things? I'm not here to say that you cannot do interesting experiments or do interesting things. There is a time for that. But as long as you're keeping your main work on track, you're hitting your main timelines, then you can invest whatever 10% of your time, the Google model, right? Where you invest 10 to 20% of your time on interesting projects, which helps you kind of build your pipeline is always worth it. So in one of my previous companies, the finance team used to have a stuffed squirrel in the finance office because he used to say like, sometimes scientists are like squirrels and they're just like, going after the next acorn that's out there. Maybe just focusing and helping the company think, kind of with some kind of blinkers on to focus on key priorities is a key skill. And what helps me do this is that I would like to think of myself as not a traditional finance executive. Given my experience in operations consulting and then a very non-traditional path to how I came into FP&A, allows me to kind of talk their language, right? When I talk to our ClinOps team or I talk to my biology or translational sciences team, I understand what they do at its core. I might not be able to do that job, but I know really well what their work involves, what is involved in developing an assay for a particular asset, what does it take to take it into the clinic. So being able to kind of speak their language helps me keep them focused as well, because they know that I know what they're doing, so they kind of keep me honest, and it allows me to keep them honest as well.
absolutely proficient in the language of biotech. Good. I guess given your background in consulting as well, I mean, across your work in capital raising and partnerships, are there common lessons or what common lessons or pitfalls stand out for early stage companies?
So for early stage companies, my key, what I would say, advice would be, raise capital that just gets you to your key inflection point, right? A lot of companies kind of say, oh my God, I raised 500 million at this valuation, right? Or whatever it is. I think that kind of doesn't really tell you like what their plan for success is, right? I truly think biotech companies should be funded, should be correctly funded, right? Like raising too much capital doesn't help you with being disciplined and staying the course, right? Because you have capital, and then once people, pump in that capital, they expect you to put it to use, right? So one of the situations I can talk to you about is in one of my former lives, there was this company that we raised a lot of money, and immediately the investors were like, oh, why don't you do X, Y, and Z, right? Like one of them involved, building a manufacturing plant for a company that did not even have a clinical candidate, right? And to me, like that was not the best use of capital. But then, the company was sitting on like hundreds of millions of dollars, and the investors wanted to see the capital being put to use. And the challenge is for investors who are outside the company, they could be on the board, but they are really not operators, right? So they see it as like, hey, everyone's building a plant. I think this company should build a plant. That's how investors think about it, right? Because they're looking at um, all the other companies. They're seeing the forest instead of the trees. But I think people who are working in the company, it's important for you to see the tree, but also the forest, right? And I think sometimes that gets lost in translation. So I'm a big believer, raise the right amount of capital that's going to allow you to get to your next inflection point. But what it also does is for your existing investors, they can see that value accretion, right? As you attain these milestones and you have success, you kind of grow the company. You kind of also help your initial investors to kind of see that upside as well. There is no one wins when you take a down round, right? So I would rather take lesser capital, show that I'm doing good work, and then keep building on that success. It also helps keep my investors happy too.
Absolutely, which is an important aspect. Let's talk a little bit about your vision for the future, Karthik. Then, what does the next phase of growth look like for Parabilis?
So one, we are currently, we put out some data from ESMO and a few other conferences where we're showing that our FOG-001, which is our lead candidate in the clinic, is making a meaningful impact on patients with desmoid tumors and also a few other, rare tumors as well. So given that the focus is going to be how do we kind of chart a path for us to take FOG-001 into a registrational study, that's going to be a key focus area for us in 2026. But beyond that, this doesn't sound exciting, but hey, we've now done this once. We've taken FOG-001, we've kind of gone through the initial phases of phase one. We have collected some data which looks exciting. How can we do this again and again, right, with other assets that we have? So if you look at our pipeline, so we do have an exciting molecule for ERG, which is one of those targets for prostate cancers, right? So can we do the same thing? Can we take it into the clinic, show that it's working? Can we do the same thing for AR, which is the androgen receptor program that we have in our pipeline? This is the less glamorous part of biotech is, the first time you put something in a patient and you're in the clinic, it's exciting. But now, hey, can you do it again and again and again, right? Can you work as an engine doing this again? So that's going to be our outlook for 26 and 27.
That's great. Repeatable processes, we hope. Are there any other initiatives, I suppose, or milestones underway that you're particularly excited about?
I think I mostly spoke about the things that I did speak about. So the focus
Yeah.
is for us, desmoid tumors is something, right? Like if you talk to the general population, they're like, oh, it's not cancer, right? We recently had a patient who came in to talk to us who's not on our trial, right? And the patient basically explained how their day-to-day life is and how unpredictable it is, right? And the patient said like, hey, people tell me like, hey, you're lucky it's not cancer, but the patient explained to us how poor the quality of life is for these patients. So I'm super excited for us to start the registration study for this in the next 12 to 14 months. So
Yeah,
that's going to be super exciting for us.
that's awesome. Well, best wishes on that. Just on I guess as you put the crystal ball out a few years over the next 5 or 10 years, where do you see the most promising opportunities, I guess in a broad sense, for advancement in biotech?
I think there are a few areas that excite me personally. So the one is something that's been brewing for a while, which is the world of bispecifics, trispecifics, and ADCs, right? ADCs as a technology has existed for what 40 years, and we are now kind of seeing the impact it has. I think that's still there's still a lot of area to grow in that space. I'm super excited to see what happens there. And what is now kind of an offshoot of ADCs, because ADCs are great alternative to chemotherapy, right? But ADC still has some off-target toxicity effects that you see in patients. So I'm also excited about what are called DACs, right? Degrader antibody conjugates that supposedly can have better safety profiles for patients. So that's something I'm looking at. And as I mentioned to you in one of our for your earlier topics, I think we talk about various things as an service, right? Like, hey, but I'm thinking of biotech strategic infrastructure as a service, and I think which is where my combination, my idea about U.S. and China working together could be great. I'm looking forward to that and seeing how we can accelerate things. And then the third thing I'm excited about is really seeing the impact of machine learning and artificial intelligence in drug discovery. And I think this is going to be more of a 10-year horizon than a 5-year horizon, but I'm super excited about that as well.
Absolutely. That's great. What, if any, final thoughts, Karthik, or advice would you offer for life sciences leaders navigating today's environment?
Uh, I can talk to you about finance specifically, and then general life sciences executives. So for finance, my 2 cents is that talk to the business, right? Talk to people, talk to scientists who work in your company. I think a lot of times the most informative chats I've had have been in the break room talking to a scientist to explain to me the experiment we're working on, right? So I think that's a very underappreciated part of how you can be a better executive professional is understanding, really what the science is. Why is your product different? What is the advantage of your technology versus what's the current standard of care? And you only get that by talking to people. Yes, you can look at your corporate tech, or you can attend your town hall and your CEO gives a great talk. That's great. But I think for you to operationally understand how it impacts your budgeting and forecasting or other finance operations is by talking to different people. And I would say talk to people at every level, right? Talk to your chief science officer, but also talk to the bench scientist who's doing the work, because that gives you like the depth of information that will make you a better finance executive. And in terms of general life sciences leaders, I still believe that be mission driven. We're all working in this industry because we believe that patients deserve something better, and we are here to give it to them. So always keep that in mind, right? Every decision that you're making, yes, it's very important to return money to investors, keep your employees happy, but at the end of the day, we are all serving patients. So keep that as your North Star. Every action that you're doing, is this going to make better therapy available to a patient? Is it going to make this therapy available faster to the patient at a lower cost? So think of that first. And I think if you think about it that way, all the other things will fall in place.
That's great, Karthik. Super. Finally, how can listeners connect with you or learn more about Parabilis Medicines?
With Parabilis Medicines, we are at most of the conferences that are relevant to us, right? So we recently presented at ESMO. We go to AACR annually, and then the triple meeting that we recently had. Most of these scientific conferences and meetings, Parabilis is there. We usually have a poster being presented. So talk to the scientist who is there. I think that's the easy way to kind of get in touch. And then our chief business officer, Greg Miller, he's a fantastically connected guy. So he's a great guy to reach out to in terms of opportunities for collaborating with us. And then with me personally, I am very active on LinkedIn. I don't believe in being active on LinkedIn only when you're looking for a job, which is the usual way that people work. There's this Adam Grant article that I read a few years ago where it says, the value of your network is the value that you provide to the network, right? From that perspective, I spend some time cultivating my network and or just trying to see how I can help other people as well. So given that I'm reasonably active on LinkedIn and I'm on Twitter as well, or what is now called X. So you can feel free to connect with me there.
Great, Karthik. Thank you for that. So that was super. So that wraps up this episode of Executive Insights for Life Sciences Innovators. I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you found today's conversation valuable. If you enjoyed the discussion, please be sure to leave us a review and share it with your network. Please also mark your calendars for January 9th at 2026, that is, at 1 o'clock Eastern Time with Jason Kralik, the CEO of TELUS Therapeutics. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, Don. Thank you.